Well, I suppose I should begin by telling you who I used to be before I became the man who lives in the trees. My name is Daniel Everett Harper. I'm 67 years old now, though for most of my life I answered more quickly to Dan than to anything else. I lived in Chicago, Illinois for 42 years, not downtown where the tourists take pictures of the skyline, but on the north side in a red brick condominium on West Belmont Avenue, third floor, Unit 3B, the kind of building with narrow hallways that always smelled faintly of someone else's dinner. From my bedroom window, I could see the elevated train tracks, and every morning at exactly 5:42, the first train roared past, rattling the glass like it was clearing its throat. I used to curse that sound, said it shaved years off my life. Funny what becomes sacred once it's gone. Chicago was loud, impatient, alive in a way that makes you feel small if you stop moving. And I did not stop moving, not for a very long time. I worked as a senior project manager for an architectural firm called Henderson and Lowe on LaSalle Street, 14 floors up in a building made almost entirely of glass and confidence. If I leaned just far enough to the left in my office, I could catch a thin ribbon of the Chicago River between two concrete towers. That sliver of water felt like a luxury view. I managed commercial renovation projects, office spaces for companies that liked words like innovation and synergy painted in vinyl lettering across their lobby walls. I wore tailored charcoal suits, polished black shoes, and enough silk ties to supply a small wedding party. My days were divided into 15-minute increments. Budget reviews at 9, contractor calls at 10:30, client presentations after lunch, site visits twice a week where I'd walk through half-finished floors with a hard hat and a clipboard, nodding like I controlled gravity. People relied on me. I was organized, efficient, calm when things went wrong, and things always went wrong. My routine was precise enough to set a watch by. I left the condo at 7:10 each morning, coat buttoned, briefcase in my right hand, and walked 3 blocks to the Belmont Red Line station. 23 minutes to Jackson if the trains behaved, 35 if they didn't. I stood in the same spot on the platform every day because I knew exactly which train car would line up closest to the stairs at my stop. Efficiency becomes a kind of religion when you live in a city like that. I stopped for coffee at a small cafe on Sheffield Avenue. Elena was usually behind the counter, silver ring in her eyebrow, already pouring my large drip, no room. We exchanged polite fragments of life, weather, traffic, the Cubs disappointing us again. I told myself that was connection, familiarity passing for intimacy. I never stayed long enough to prove myself wrong. By most definitions, I was successful. I earned well into 6 figures by my late 50s. My retirement accounts were tidy and respectable. I had a financial advisor named Martin who spoke in soothing graphs and assured me I was on track. I owned my condo outright by 62. No debt, no scandal, no dramatic collapse. Clients trusted me with multi-million-dollar budgets. Younger associates came to my office for guidance, asking how I stayed so calm under pressure. I would smile and say something rehearsed about perspective. What I didn't tell them was that staying calm was easier than asking myself whether any of it mattered. Being needed feels good. It fills a room. It fills a life. And I was needed constantly. Emails buzzing, phone vibrating, someone always requiring a decision only I could make. That kind of importance is addictive. Evenings were quieter, but not softer. I'd loosen my tie the moment I stepped through the door, hang my jacket carefully in the closet, and pour 2 fingers of bourbon into a heavy glass I'd owned since my 40s. The television went on before the lights sometimes, filling the condo with voices so the silence wouldn't get ambitious. I'd stand at the window and watch headlights glide along Belmont, people moving with purpose toward restaurants, gyms, dates, obligations. Everyone seemed to be in motion, and I told myself that meant we were all alive in the correct way. I kept busy on weekends too. Networking events, professional dinners, the occasional gallery opening where I nodded thoughtfully at abstract paintings I didn't understand. It all looked impressive from a distance. From up close, it mostly felt like maintenance. And yet, because there is always an and yet, somewhere around my 66th birthday, something inside me grew very quiet. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, just quiet. I began waking up before the 5:42 train, staring at the ceiling in the dim gray of early morning while the city prepared to surge again. My calendar was full for months in advance. My accounts were stable. My title looked good printed beneath my name. I had done everything the way you're supposed to do it. Climbed steadily, saved responsibly, avoided disaster. If you had asked me then whether I was successful, I would have said yes without hesitation, and I would not have been lying. But I had everything I thought I was supposed to want, and I was tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. It wasn't a collapse. That's the part people expect. A dramatic firing, a heart attack in the middle of a board meeting, some cinematic unraveling where everything falls apart at once. That isn't what happened. What happened was quieter than that. It was a Tuesday in late October, cold enough for the wind to feel personal. I was standing on the Red Line platform at Belmont, briefcase in hand, coat collar turned up, when a man about my age collapsed 2 yards in front of me. No warning, just folded. His coffee hit the concrete before he did. For a second, no one moved. Then someone shouted. Someone else knelt down, and the train screeched into the station as if it had somewhere more important to be. I remember staring at that man's shoes, brown leather, well polished, and thinking how ordinary they looked. That thought has stayed with me more than the ambulance lights. They said it was his heart. I never learned his name. The train resumed service 20 minutes later. People stepped around the damp outline where the coffee had spread and continued with their morning. I continued with mine. I rode downtown, led a budget meeting at 9, reviewed structural revisions at 11:30, approved a materials order before lunch. I did all the things I was supposed to do, but something had shifted slightly out of alignment, like a door that no longer closes without effort. I couldn't stop seeing those shoes, couldn't stop thinking about how he'd probably woken up that morning with a calendar full of small obligations, and then he didn't. A few weeks after that, I went in for a routine physical, nothing serious, just the annual maintenance appointment men my age pretend not to dread. My doctor, a calm woman in her 40s who never rushed her sentences, told me my blood pressure was high. Not alarming, she said, manageable, but persistent. Stress accumulates, she told me. It doesn't always announce itself. I nodded as if she were describing someone else. I had always considered myself steady, reliable, not the type to fray. But that night, standing in my bathroom, I looked at myself in the mirror longer than usual. The light above the sink was unforgiving. I noticed how tight my jaw rested even when I wasn't speaking, how shallow my breathing had become. I tried to remember the last time I felt unhurried. I couldn't. The realization did not arrive with thunder. It arrived like fog, gradual, indisputable. I began to notice the city differently, not as something I was conquering, but as something that was quietly consuming me. The noise no longer felt energizing. It felt relentless. Meetings that once thrilled me began to feel rehearsed. Conversations looped. The goals kept moving. Promotions no longer promised relief. They promised more responsibility. I had spent 4 decades optimizing my schedule, and yet I had no idea what I was optimizing it for. I wasn't miserable. That would have been easier to diagnose. I was simply misaligned, living a life that made sense on paper but felt strangely absent in practice. When I mentioned to a colleague that I was considering retiring earlier than planned, he laughed and said, "You? You'd be bored in a week." When I told Martin, my financial advisor, that I was thinking about selling the condo and simplifying, he adjusted his glasses and asked whether I'd calculated the long-term implications. My sister in Milwaukee thought I was joking. "You've worked too hard to just disappear," she said. That word lingered, disappear, as if stepping off the treadmill meant ceasing to exist. I understood their reactions. For years, I would have responded the same way. Success is difficult to walk away from when it's the only language you've spoken fluently. The moment itself came on an ordinary Sunday afternoon. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sunlight stretching across the hardwood floor, listening to the distant rumble of traffic. I had a legal pad in front of me. On one side, I wrote what I would lose: proximity, convenience, reputation, a view of the skyline. On the other side, I wrote what I might gain: quiet, space, time that belonged to no one but me. The second column was shorter, but it felt heavier. Not grand, not heroic, just honest. I realized I did not want to wait for a more dramatic sign. I did not want to become the man whose polished shoes were the last remarkable thing about him. I wanted to leave while the decision was still mine. I sold the apartment in March of 2018, closed the door, left the keys on the counter. The property sat just outside Marquette, Michigan, about 20 minutes from town if the road behaved, and closer to 40 if it didn't. 10 acres of mixed pine and birch, uneven ground, more rocks than I'd anticipated, and a narrow dirt driveway that felt like a suggestion rather than a road. The cabin itself was smaller than my old living room. One main space, a wood stove, a narrow loft for sleeping, and a porch that leaned slightly to the left as if it were tired too. When I first unlocked the door, the air inside smelled like cold wood and something faintly metallic. No hum of traffic, no footsteps in the hallway, just stillness. I set my duffel bag down and waited for the feeling I'd been chasing. Peace, clarity, some cinematic affirmation that I'd made the right decision. What I felt instead was exposure. The silence wasn't gentle, it was enormous. The first night was colder than I expected. I had watched videos about chopping wood, stacking wood, feeding a stove properly. Watching is not the same as knowing. I fumbled with kindling like a man trying to impress an audience that wasn't there. The fire sputtered twice before it held. Smoke curled back into the room because I hadn't adjusted the flue correctly. I opened a window and stood there coughing, laughing once at the absurdity of it. Senior project manager of multi-million-dollar renovations, defeated by a small cast iron door. The temperature dropped quickly after sunset. Forest darkness is different from city darkness. It doesn't glow at the edges. It settles fully. I lay in the loft, listening to sounds I couldn't categorize. Branches brushing the roof, something moving through leaves. The cabin shifting as the wood contracted in the cold. Every noise felt intentional. Morning came slowly, filtered through tall trees instead of skyscrapers. I woke stiff, not from fear, but from unfamiliarity. The bed was narrower, the air sharper. I boiled water on the stove for coffee, misjudged the flame, and nearly burned the handle of the kettle. Small incompetence humbles a man quickly. There was no Elena behind a counter, no predictable exchange, just me and the mechanics of staying warm and fed. I discovered that hauling water from the outdoor pump in early spring requires gloves and patience. I discovered that splitting wood efficiently depends more on rhythm than strength. My hands blistered in places that had grown soft over decades of keyboards and steering wheels. By afternoon, I was tired in a clean way, the kind of tired that lives in muscles, not in thought. The loneliness arrived around the fourth day. Not dramatic, not crushing, just a subtle absence of background humanity. In Chicago, even isolation had noise behind it. Sirens, voices, footsteps overhead. Here, when the wind stopped, there was nothing. I caught myself speaking aloud once while tightening a loose hinge, narrating what I was doing as if someone might be listening. That startled me more than the wildlife. I drove into town that weekend just to walk the aisles of a hardware store, to hear the low murmur of conversation between strangers. I didn't stay long. I realized I wasn't craving people as much as I was craving reassurance that the world still moved without me. There were mistakes. I stacked firewood too close to the cabin at first and had to move it when I learned about moisture and insects. I underestimated how early the sun disappears in November at that latitude. I bought the wrong kind of oil for the generator and spent an afternoon reading the manual like it was sacred text. But there were victories, too. The first time I split a log cleanly in one strike. The first night the fire held steady until morning. The first meal I cooked entirely on the stove without scorching anything. These were small accomplishments by any urban standard, but they felt disproportionately meaningful. No one applauded, no one needed to. The proof was in the warmth. By late autumn, the forest had thinned and the sky widened between branches. I began to recognize patterns. The way the wind shifted before a storm, the particular rhythm of woodpeckers in the afternoon, the way frost formed along the edge of the porch railing. I stopped checking my phone every hour. Some days I forgot where I had left it. The silence no longer pressed against me. It surrounded me. It asked nothing. It simply existed. And somewhere between the third sunrise and the first winter, I started breathing different. People assume the lesson is about nature. It isn't. The trees are beautiful, yes. The silence is honest. But what changed me wasn't the scenery. It was the subtraction. In the city, my life was layered with noise so constant, I mistook it for purpose. Emails, meetings, headlines, performance reviews, dinner reservations made weeks in advance. Out here, there are fewer layers, fewer decisions disguised as urgency. When something needs attention, it is usually simple and undeniable. The fire is dying, the roof is leaking, the path is iced over. You fix what is in front of you, and then you sit down. The absence of constant stimulation didn't shrink my world the way I feared. It clarified it. I used to measure my days by productivity. Now I measure them by presence. In Chicago, a successful day meant crossing off enough tasks to justify exhaustion. Here, a successful day might mean stacking wood before the snow, or noticing the way the light shifts across the clearing around 4 in the afternoon. That would have sounded foolish to the man I was at 50. He would have called it sentimental. But after 60, you begin to understand that time is not something you accumulate. It is something you spend, whether you mean to or not. The question becomes less about achievement and more about alignment. Not how much did I accomplish, but did today feel like mine? Money changed meaning too. I don't romanticize poverty. Comfort matters, heat matters, security matters. But beyond a certain threshold, additional income only purchased distraction, a larger television, a newer car, a better suit. None of those things were wrong. They simply demanded maintenance, mental and financial. Out here, my expenses are predictable and modest. Wood for the stove, occasional repairs, groceries when I drive into town. I still check my accounts, but they no longer define my mornings. I learned that financial stability is freedom only if you know what you want freedom for. Otherwise, it becomes another number you defend. Loneliness reveals something unexpected. In the city, I was rarely alone, yet often disconnected. Here, I am physically alone most days, but I feel less divided. There is no version of myself performing competence for colleagues or politeness for strangers. There is only the man who wakes up, tends the fire, walks the property line, listens to the wind move through pine needles. I speak less, but when I do, whether to the cashier in town or to my sister on the phone, I notice I'm not rushing toward the next thing. After 60, relationships simplify. You stop pretending every acquaintance is a friendship. You hold tighter to the few people who matter and let the rest drift without resentment. The greatest shift, though, has been internal. I no longer confuse motion with meaning. For decades, I believed that staying busy protected me from something: regret, insignificance, mortality. But stillness did not destroy me. It exposed me. It forced me to sit with the question I had avoided in conference rooms and commuter trains. Is this how you want to spend what's left? That question is not morbid. It is clarifying. After 60, the horizon becomes visible, not in a frightening way, just in a factual one. And facts have a way of sharpening priorities. I care less about being impressive, more about being at ease in my own company. I did not move to the forest to prove anything. I moved because I finally understood that a quieter life was not a smaller life. It was a more deliberate one. I still think about Chicago sometimes. The train at 5:42, the river between buildings, the feeling of being urgently needed. I don't resent that chapter. It built me, but it is no longer where I belong. What matters now is simpler: warmth, time, honesty, the ability to hear my own thoughts without interruption. I didn't escape the world, I just stopped running with it. If this story meant something to you, even a small part of it, consider subscribing to the channel. I share these reflections not because I have all the answers, but because sometimes a quiet perspective can save you a few unnecessary years of noise. If you'd like to hear more conversations like this, stay with me.